Hello and welcome to Booklust. I'm your host, Nancy Pearl. My guest today is novelist Jasper Fforde, whose new book, Red Side Story, has just been published. Jasper, it's so nice to see you again. I feel like we're old friends by now, although we're not
Yes, you too.
old. We're just friends.
No.
So, Red Side Story, the second book in a trilogy that began with Shades of Grey. We were talking before, before we started recording, and one of the things I was saying it was that I remember the last time I interviewed you was at University Bookstore here in Seattle, and we were talking about you had written Shades of Grey and some young adult novels, and we were fantasy novels, and we were talking about you were in Seattle to talk about one of the fantasy novels. And I remember saying to you, oh, Jasper, when is the sequel to Shades of Grey coming out? Because I just loved the notion. Could you talk about the world of Shades of Grey and now Red Side Story?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for that, and it's wonderful to be back talking to you again. I mean, it really is. It was such a lovely chat. I remember I looked actually at my notes to see, because I do production notes for when I go on tour, and I looked at the tour, and it did say that the high point of the talk was a high point of the tour was talking to you at Seattle University Bookshop. So that's wonderful. So yeah. Oh yeah. Red Side Story and Shades of Grey. So Shades of Grey was my seventh novel, and the previous six had been 4 Thursday Next books and 2 nursery crime books, and they work upon the conceit of essentially taking what is already there and then messing it around with it. So it's either messing around with the classics in a sort of reverently irreverent way, or it's retelling nursery rhyme stories. But all of them, all 6 books, were essentially moving furniture around, like moving memory furniture around in people's heads in an unusual way. And for my 7th book, I thought, well, Jasper, come on, you're meant to be a novelist, so you're meant to be writing stuff that's your own work. So I thought, right, let's really go for something that's very unusual, very different, hopefully a bit original. So essentially, it's about a world order, maybe 500 years, 1,000 years, 1,500 years in the future, past some unknown sort of problem, the something that happened, as it's referred to. And it's a world order based entirely on visual color. So the hierarchy is based not on something mundane like voting for people, but on the colors that you can see. So if you can see the most amount of blue in your village, you'll be the blue prefect, red, yellow, and so forth. And the amount of these colors that you can see set you permanently within the structure of the society. So what you can see at your Ishihara test at the age of 20 is what you are forever, and all worrisome life choices removed, who you can marry, what you can do. But the greys, the achromatic greys who can see no color at all, are right at the bottom of the heap. And into this rather strange and rather off-kilter world, I put the hero of my story, Eddie Russet, who's a red about to take his Ishihara, and he meets Jane Grey, who's this rather lively, shall we say, Grey, who kind of opens his eyes to the sort of iniquity of the society. And that's basically the sort of the idea, if you like.
And did you know right from the beginning that you were going to write a trilogy? I mean, I just wanted. I think what I wanted was more about Eddie and Jane and the world. It wasn't that it ended. Maybe I'm wrong. My memory could be wrong, but it didn't end in like someone tied to a railroad track and the train is approaching and you have to read this. I mean, it was a complete novel in my mind. I just wanted more of them.
Yeah, I mean, there was always a sort of two sequels in the offing. I was always going to do that. I think the ending of that first one was maybe a little bit a bit of a cliffhanger, and we did leave Eddie and Jane having sort of fallen in love. Andy
Right.
started off by sort of, Jane sort of basically threatening to kill him, and almost killing him several times. The fact that she didn't is sort of the reasons why we think she might quite like him. Um, and of course they can't marry at the end of they can't get married at the end. Marriage is a big institution in the book. They can't get married at the end of the book because he's a red and she's been made a green, and they're complementary colours, and they can never meet and talk or anything. So a bit of a sort of conundrum. The point about it is that, and the reason that, and I must apologise obviously to people listening for having to wait so long for a sequel, is that it didn't sell very well. And I think what happened is that people wanted more of the memory furniture moving around in their heads, and they looked at the back and they thought, well, I like nursery rhymes. I like Thursday Next. I like all that, the classics and mucking around, and maybe
Right.
this isn't for me. And so it didn't sell very well, although it got good reviews, and the people who read my books very generously said they enjoyed it a huge amount. So we went back to Thursday and we did some
Right.
various things. But this is the thing, just in the same way as the Air Affair was basically generated word of mouth by, as far as I can see, English teachers and librarians, because back in those days there was no social media, so there's a lot of emails going, and bulletin boards very early on. There was a sort of groundswell of sort of feeling, and I used to get all these emails coming in saying, when are we going to do it? When are we going to see this? We really need to see this. And in the end, I thought, I don't think this is an unwanted child after all. This book, I think actually people really genuinely have taken it to heart, and I should be writing the sequel. So I reread it like 4 or 5 times, and then I just carried on exactly where we left off. It's like a week later, and we just carry on problems, everything else.
One of the things I loved about the book is that, or loved about the world, I guess, is that your name reflects the color that you are. So I kind of had this picture of you, sitting in your office right there, looking at a thesaurus to find all of the synonyms for the word red, and how much fun you must have had with the somewhat reds, like the mauves. And then Eddie's a true red. 87%, I think, is his Ishihara score. Did you have, did you, I mean, obviously it's a very repressive society that Eddie and Jane are trying to understand what the something was that happened, and then where they fit into this greater world, because you drop a bunch of clues, that we hear when Eddie and Jane hear it. Did you know from the do you know what's, is this a fair question? Do you know, are we going to learn what happened, or is that not important?
I think we are. I think what we're doing is kind of peeling off onion onion layers, if you like. So the first book was very much Eddie doesn't know what's going on, and Jane says, no, this is what's going on, and it's bad. And then in the second book, it's like, actually, Jane had no idea what was going on, and in fact, there's another layer entirely. And it just, things start peeling back, and it's as though you're lifting a curtain and there's another curtain behind, or if you go to a very very swish theatre and the curtain's open and another curtain comes up and then there's a safety curtain behind that. And I think I wanted Jane, because she was always the one who seemed to know stuff in the first book. I wanted Jane not to know stuff. I wanted Jane to be kind of like Eddie in the first book. And now they're really both grappling with these uncertainties. I think I do want, I think that's something that happened. I would like to reveal it, but I think by the time I come to reveal it, I think it might be irrelevant, perhaps. I mean, I'd like it to be one of those where something that you thought was really huge suddenly is like, actually that's probably the least interesting thing in the story. But I'm not sure. But there are clues sort of littered throughout both books as to what that something that happened
Right.
might
Right.
be. So I
Yeah.
think I will reveal it. Yeah.
Were you thinking of when you started on this project of this very repressive world based on kind of an unreasonable basis for who you are, so you're living a very narrow existence? I mean, people are talking about it in, like Orwell or but funny. I think we need to say how funny it is.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
was that in the back of your mind? I mean, your books are just wonderful fantasies, and they're perfect for people who love to read, and librarians and libraries. And I get to be I was in one of your books, me, the librarian. I loved that, and I thanked you already for it, but I thank you again. But so it's not that it's the real. The Thursday Next books are so clearly not of this particular world where we're living. But the Red Side Story, Shades of Grey and Red Side Story, you could kind of argue that, or maybe you wouldn't need to argue, that this is that it's not so far from reality.
It is. No, it's a really, really good point, and it's actually something that I hadn't considered. But when I go on tour and I talk to people, in the signing queue, and they have Q's and A's and everything, it's always great fun because I obviously I bring something to it, but I always take things away. So it's actually it's very enjoyable, and actually I get to think about new things. And someone said to me, Jasper, I think the Shades of Grey series is the only one of your series that could potentially be set in our world.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see anything that I could argue with that.
Right.
And I suddenly thought, no, that actually might be in our world. I mean, a very different world, and it's a long time in the future, but things happen, as we all know, very, very quickly.
Right.
In the last 60, 70 years, if you imagine the changes that we've had on this planet, and certainly when it comes to technology. So I sort of took that in mind and thought, yeah, that's actually something I could promote in it, is not have any, something magically absurd that couldn't possibly exist in our world. But the great thing about satire, and I think it is a satirical book, is it, the satire counterpoints the absurdities of the real world by, making fun of it in a book and exaggerating everything. But I kind of, it's almost like I wanted to go, 1984 is the primary source for anyone who is doing some sort of, future dystopia, social dystopia. And that was very much sort of terrifying, of this sort of unknown external forces that were ranked against you. And I wanted to actually turn that inside and have it internal forces. So the terrors of being in a small village, and the fact that you could have the guards and the prisoners are actually the same people, that they are kept in this regime simply by their own adherence to this set of rules, which seem a lot of the time very arbitrary.
Right.
And I think there's a truth there somewhere, in there. But it's great fun to play with those absurdities, and also with things that we don't discuss very much, like marriage markets, and reproduction politics and stuff like that, which obviously come into the book quite a lot. So it's just a nice way to experiment with absurdities of being human, but also the pleasure and delights of being a human, because we're wonderful and absurd and hideous and awful and fantastic and funny and all mixed up in the same thing. And if I wasn't a human, I think I'd probably like to be one.
But thank goodness you are, because we have those books, I think. When you were a kid, is what you read fantasy? Was that your big?
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of everything. I mean, I like, if I read something and I enjoy it, or I watch something and I enjoy it, the genre doesn't tend to matter so much. The things that really excited me, though, were fantasy and sci-fi, because I just love the idea that you could. It's like smoke and mirrors. It's why I was attracted to the film industry. You can just create this this fantasy world, this amazing world where there's nothing that can't happen, simply by the power of one's own imagination. And reading, I mean, I was, as everyone is, a big fan of the Narnia books, C.S. Lewis when I was a kid, and reading a lot of children's sci-fi. There was a writer named Nicholas Fisk who seems lost to the world now, but he was great stuff when I was reading him, and they were just great stories, and they just took you away from this sort of slightly mundane childhood and into this world where people had adventures, and I think that's what we want. We want to go on adventures or be taken on adventures and just discover amazing ideas that we didn't realize were there.
And that's what your books do. I mean, I think kind of all this genre labeling has always upset me, because it immediately limits the readership, because first of all, it's in a different place in the library normally than from the alphabetical thing. It's going to be in fantasy and science fiction, and many people have never gotten into the wonder of science fiction and fantasy. They've never read a book that allowed them to see everything that those types of books could do. And so because I say Red Side Story or Shades of Grey or The Air Affair is fantasy, there's a whole, unfortunately, of course, group of people whose their mind, they say, I don't read fantasy. But yet Shades of Grey and Red Side Story are adventure stories that happen to be set in, that are very funny and happen to be set in a world that is not our own.
It is a problem. I mean, I don't know what I'd call mine: social satire or social adventure, or it's very difficult. I think genre is, I call it the measles of the book world. It'd be nice if libraries were based on color of the cover, and someone would come in and say, well, look, I read this really good book and it had a red cover. Do you have any other books with red covers? Because they're clearly good. The part of the library that I really like is the oversized book section, because then you've got the sort of illustrated, Bronte country next to farm tractors, and I can be interested in both with, no shame at all. But another point, very interesting, and this is about unintended consequences, and the Air Affair, which I kind of think of sort of juvenilia. It was me just mucking around as a very young writer, not a particularly young person, but a very young writer, and just mucking around and having fun with this and being silly. And what I found rather delightfully is that people arrive with the Air Affair because they're interested. Someone said, oh, it's a good time travel story in there, or a good story about, it's a good silly fantasy or whatever, or it's got dodos. And I've had people arrive in it, and for one reason, and then gone, well, do you know this Jane Eyre? I haven't ever read Jane Eyre, and maybe I should read Jane Eyre. And they did, and they loved it, and they thought, okay, I think the classics aren't so bad after all, so maybe I'll read a few more. And and what are featured in Jasper's books? Let's just look at those. And all of a sudden, you're doing Oliver Twist, Wuthering Heights or something. And for me, that was, I really liked that. That it was like a sort of story Grand Central. And you come in on one train and leave on another, and I kind of like that. And it's always nice to hear from readers when they say that.
And I think that world that you created for the Air Affair books, where books are so central, they're the world really, and the way you explain, Jasper, I'm a huge fan of your books, whatever. Do you think that they would ever? So you were in film, you did movie stuff, film stuff. Do you think these would ever be filmed, and would they have to use CGI and all of that, or could they?
Well, the Thursday books.
Yeah, or the Shades of Grey books.
Shades of Grey. It would be difficult because it's kind of everyone's perception. And having telling a movie in point of view, a POV, your point of view, would be an interesting idea. So you would just see it literally as someone's POV, and then you turn to someone else's POV, and they would see the different colours. I think it would be difficult if it was a book that had sold 25 million copies,
Right.
and everyone kind of knew what it was about, even if they hadn't read it, much like the Harry Potter series. Then I think it would be a lot easier. But I think selling that to a
Right.
very cautious producer would be immensely hard.
Right.
Immensely hard.
But the Thursday Next books, there you have a heroine, and
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel slightly that the Thursday Next books are, because they're books about stories and stories about books, I think they're kind of for us, readers.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think that once a film company got hold of, a film crew got hold of it, a film production company got hold of it, they'd want to change it. And I think the best Thursday Next film would be a story about a character who travels into movies, and then you would see them in the back of movies,
Right.
and creeping around whilst the movie was happening behind them, like sort of slightly like Rosencrantz and
Right.
Guildenstern are Dead, which was
Right.
Tom Stoppard, a brilliant piece of
Yes.
theatre and film. So I think that would probably be the way to do it.
Okay.
I'm not sure it would work really.
and okay, sad to say, because I think I'm not a big movie person, but I would love to see the way that world of Thursday Next is portrayed. That would be fun visually, and yeah, and I have become pretty addicted to audiobooks. Are you an audio person at all?
Yes, totally. Well, I am actually. I'm an undiagnosed dyslexic, right? And I only found this out within the last 10 years. So I didn't know that everybody else had so much trouble reading books as I did. And of course, when you find out you're dyslexic, you never knew. Of course, everything becomes crystal clear, and you understand. And suddenly you go, oh God, laboring. And someone said to me, "So, dyslexic, really? So you read on audio then?" And I went, "Well, no, but I'm certainly going to give it a whirl." And I do all my reading on audio now, and I love it. It's so good. And when anyone says, "Oh, well, if it's audio, it's not reading," it's like, no, it is reading.
Right.
It's totally reading.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I'd known that 30 years ago, and I would have read, twice as many books as I have now. So yeah, audio. I love audio.
Do you have a desire to read to do the reading, the audiobooks of your books, reading the audiobooks?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind. I think probably voice actors actually are sort of trained in this and a bit better at it. I mean, I think I could do it. But what's interesting about audio is it's an industry that hasn't changed for many, many years. And now they're trying to push the envelope and sort of just change things around a bit. So in the audio of Red Side Story, I read out the chapter headings. And in the last of my Dragon Slayer series, which is the last Troll War, I actually read the last section of it because it's in a different voice. It's no longer first person narrative, Jennifer. It's in a different voice. And they said, "Look, why don't you do this? Because then you can be telling the story and you're the narrator." And I'm going, "Oh my God, that's so brilliant. Yes, perfect." And then also, again, they got in touch, Soho Press, who are publishing me in the States now, and I love them. They're just such a lovely company.
I love them too.
And oh yeah, they're just so good.
Yeah.
So nice to work with. Nothing's too much trouble. Nothing's difficult. They're just great. So they said, "Look, can we do a bonus chapter for the US edition?" I went, "Yeah, sure, but I'll do something a bit different because I always like to do that." And I did something a bit different, and it wasn't something that you could easily make into audio. So they said, "Look, audio, is there something we could do? Do you have any ideas for audio?" And I said, "Okay, well, I'll write a two-hander, right? And then you either can get voice actors to do it in the States, or me and my friend Brendan, who's a comedian, and we can do it here." And that's what we did. So at the end of the audio, Red Side Story, for the US edition, there is me and my friend Brendan doing a little two-handed play, Lit,
wow.
which is only for US audio listeners. So,
Okay.
and I like that about, the audio are doing this, and getting authors involved to write stuff and do extras and maybe even do some voice.
Yeah. Because I got to read my novel, when it came out in 2017. That's one of the things I really wanted to do, because I felt like I was the narrator of the novel. I was the one telling the story, even though it wasn't me, but I mean, I was the one telling the story. And so, my agent worked it out so that I got to read it. So I loved that, actually. Such a ham that I am. Jasper, Jasper, thank you so much for joining us today. And Shades of Grey, Red Side Story, and can't wait for the third one.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been really, really great. Thank you.